Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the Public and Corporate Services Standing Committee of Tuesday, April 5th, 2017. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. And I'm looking for an adoption of the agenda. Moved by Doug, seconded by Susan. All in favor? Carried. Item 3 is the committee minutes. The minutes of March 28th, 2017 Public Services Standing Committee. We have recommendation that they be approved, and I see Doug's hand.
Thank you. And this is the meeting I chaired a month ago, and there is one small change I'd suggest, and that is, describe this. It's under section 5, Public Works Benchmarking, and under the questions and comments included, in the second to last bullet reads, suggestion that data be publicized on its own, not part of the annual report. I remember that point because I brought it up, but it should be data be publicized on its own in addition to being part of the annual report. It was not intended to be an either or. So if that amendment is acceptable, then I will move the amended minutes.
Moved by, seconded by Patty. All in favor? Motion carries. So that's the business arising from those. And so we shall move on, and we are ahead of schedule. And looking at our business today is the DNA cost analysis, presented by Mr. Sim. Take it away, sir.
All right. Good morning. Jeff Sim, Senior Director of Human Resources and Public Safety. So, Council, our CFO has asked to have clarification and direction from Council regarding the payment of past and ongoing DNA analysis costs. So you have a report before you that outlines the issue and provides some of the history, but just to quickly go over that again, since 1999, the cost for DNA analysis has been a cost borne by the federal government with cost sharing agreements with the provinces and territories. And the provinces and territories have contributed a fixed amount since 2004. In 2013, the federal government advised the provinces and territories that they wanted a new agreement that saw costs actually related to the use. And of course, in 1999, the DNA analysis, though it would have been and was more expensive, wasn't as prevalent as is currently used. So the federal government and provincial government entered into discussions, and in 2015, local governments were made aware that from the RCMP that the federal government and the provincial government had reached a new cost sharing model. And these costs have never been part of the contract for police services from the provincial police, which is, of course is contracted with the RCMP. The municipalities were advised that the additional expense would be invoiced based on the municipality's proportionate usage, and a phase-in period was outlined as is outlined in the report. As a result of this, the several municipalities and UBCM UBCM took forward the municipality's concerns about the increased cost and about the communication process. And that discussion has resulted in a variety, or happened in a variety of forums with UBCM advocating on behalf of the municipalities. Through the research that I've conducted, learned that despite UBCM's advocacy, the province has maintained its decision on the cost sharing. And what I also learned is, according to UBCM, that the province has improved their communication process so that municipalities and local governments are better involved and notified with regards to policing issues. On an unrelated note, since this issue, the costs for blood pattern analysis, those base costs have not been transferred to the to local governments. And as mentioned, the district have not paid the DNA analysis invoices to date. The 2016 invoice is just over $3,000. 2017 is 17,400 and change. And then in 2018-19, the way the formula will work is that they'll a 2-year average based on usage and actual costs will be established so that then municipalities will know what they have to pay for each of those 2 years, and then the following 2 years they'll look at the usage and actual costs and set a new amount for 2 years, which will assist somewhat with budgeting. So the recommendation from staff is that council approve the resolution as noted in the report. And I'll stop talking.
I don't see Ms. Matthews here, but I'm just curious that comes out to about $20,000. I'm just curious as to where that would come from in our budgeting, as we're just wrapping up our budget for this year. I don't know if we have provision for that, or Patty?
I don't know where Ms. Matthews is.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm just putting
I
myself.
saw your hand, I thought you had
I'll
the
go find her.
answer. Yeah, I'm just curious to.
Robin's gonna go see.
Okay,
She
thanks.
shows
I saw Patty's hand snap up there. I thought you
Yeah.
had the magical answer to that.
No.
Any other comments from anyone? Right?
The downloading gets more and more obvious and egregious every time we get downloaded on. This is so blatantly a download. I thought last year when we talked about this, we were more in the $12,000 or $13,000 a year range than the $17,000 to $20,000 range. So I'm surprised by the number, but it could just be my recollection is off. Last year we consciously decided simply not to pay it, I believe. We basically said, thank you for the invoice. You shouldn't be invoicing us. And I'm kind of the mind to keep going along that route, but I'm certainly open to discussing the pros and cons of taking that approach.
Oh,
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. 2017, 2018 and beyond, I take it at that point the province is not putting in its 1.3 million, so the entire cost then is transferred to municipalities, if I read that correctly.
Through the chair, the province will continue to contribute the 1.3 million, and then this will be based on actual costs on the average. So my understanding is that the province will continue to contribute that 1.3, but there will be a cost sharing with the local governments.
And the other point was, I remember from the previous discussions, one of the concerns of this when you get into averaging and so forth is, I mean, heaven forbid we have another Picton incident or something like that, which created just massive amounts of DNA work from all accounts that I've read. And what would happen if a municipality, even a larger municipality, had a cost that was related to an investigation like that? I mean, it could just, something like on that scale could almost bankrupt the municipality or just throw the thing way off. And is there any kind of cap or cushion, or would there be any redress if something like that happened in Squamish and you're faced with a cost like that?
So through the chair, my research didn't contemplate an investigation, certainly on the scope of the investigation that Councillor Race notes. I think in one of those cases that would likely be beyond the scope of the local municipality, so our local detachment here, and then would very likely be taken over by the provincial policing, and so then I'm just speculating and presuming to some degree, but based on my past history, that it would become more of a provincial investigation versus a local government one, and definitely I think that would be the approach to take with the Police Services Division and related parties to suggest that that's not a local government related expense, for not just this, but all the investigative avenues would be beyond the capacity of the district here.
Patty's on deck, but I'm just gonna go to Ms. Matthews as I drag you out. I'm sure you have other things to do in the back. I pose my question again to you. The recommendation is that we pay the outstanding bill of $20,000 for the DNA for last year and this year. And so I was wondering, we've just completed the budget, so where would those monies come from? And have we put any thought to to paying that?
Yes, so right now we would take them from the operating budgets. Generally, the RCMP, there is usually a little bit of surplus that comes out because the contracts don't always flush out exactly the budget. So there's usually a little bit of room. We can monitor it for the rest of the year and just make sure. We also have a fairly good provision in the protective services area. If it comes to that, we'll be able to draw from that provision. If we come to a position where it looks like we're not going to be able to manage it operationally.
Thank you. Patty?
Yeah, I'm certainly of the mind that we don't pay this. We send them back a letter saying, this is your responsibility, this is a judicial issue. We certainly won't consider paying this until such time as we have clarity on some of the issues that Councillor Race talked about in terms of exponential DNA issues within a given year that might randomly just very quickly put up this budget. That's one of the challenges of a budget like this is we have no control over it. It can really jump dramatically and mess up budgets pretty quickly as soon as you get one or two investigations, and that could have nothing to do with Squamish whatsoever. It could be something that happened over mainland and a body is transported up here, and then all of a sudden we're faced with these exponential costs that should be borne by the Justice Department. So, I'm of the mind that we at this point don't pay it. We send a clear message about why we don't think we should be paying it. Encouraging the federal and the provincial government to renegotiate. New governments are in place now, particularly at the federal level. This was something that the Harper Conservatives brought in, and who knows? Maybe we'll ask it at the all candidates meeting tonight whether or not different government may treat this differently and put a different lens on it. But I'm of the mind that we simply write back saying, thank you for your invoice. We don't believe we should be paying this invoice. We certainly won't consider paying this until we have answers to a certain amount of questions, particularly with regard to protection of municipalities in the event of extreme circumstances, as being a bare minimum.
I tend to concur with you. Ted's up and
Well, I agree, and I just wondered how much extra we spent this year on RCMP. I know we've got a new RCMP, so we did put a fair bit of money into the budget, beefing up RCMP this year, and for that reason, we don't have extra money in the budget for anything else. Didn't we get a new person this year?
So last year.
Yeah, to just clarify through the chair, the new person, I believe, was in 2015, but the budget, the total RCMP budget is has not all been spent. So for that, we're expected to come in at a surplus.
I thought we had spent money.
Which is fine to plan for surplus.
Yeah.
Sue?
Thanks.
Don't record the wink on the minutes.
You can record my income. I would completely concur. I think it's not even laid out how the $19,000, it's just a blanket bill for an amount that is irrelevant to DNA analysis, actually. If you look at contributing, why would we be contributing federally from a municipal budget? It makes no sense to me whatsoever to contribute to lab analysis of a DNA sample from a municipality as a share, and I would totally agree with not paying the bill.
Doug?
Yeah, thanks. So I think, we've gone kind of banged head with the province on policing issues before, and And the last time, it was significantly more money, and it just affected our community and not the rest of the province. But I think, and so it was worth fighting, and we ultimately were successful with that. So but I think in this case, I mean, if we're the only municipality, then I don't think there's much hope for us being, getting our way on this thing. And I think we're going to be swept along with the tide. But I would like clarification on the averaging and the possibility of a cap, and maybe some of the uncertainty that this creates could be perhaps dealt with by even extending the averaging, making it a 3-year averaging instead of 2, or something like that. But just so that if we are going to face this budget amount, it's not something that we can't deal with through circumstances far beyond our control. So I'd be inclined to go back to the province on those points, particularly so it kind of makes our budget process a little more friendly. But I think ultimately we are going to be swept along with the majority of the communities in British Columbia.
Good.
Well, I was also thinking, you know, what if we get a half a Picton? So that covered off on that. And I also thought, why are we fighting for 20,000? We should be fighting for a lot more. But I think it does send a message, and you know, we just go too big all the time. Patty's right, it's just one thing after another. So I don't mind putting up a little bit of resistance and bring it up at DBCM and bring it up at the all candidates meeting. And otherwise, when does it stop?
Thanks. Just a question, is there any way to hypothetically know, because it was brought up at UBCM, so there obviously are other municipalities that are resisting the idea. Is there any way to know how many or who they, you know, where that stat lies?
Certainly at the mayor's group that meets with the RCMP regularly, unanimous objection to this issue. I don't think we're going to be alone in abstaining from paying this. You know, every community under 5,000 doesn't pay for policing anyway, so they may not get into the argument, but the rest of the municipalities, these are hundreds of thousands of dollars to large cities, hundreds of thousands, if not larger than that. So I don't think we're going to be alone in this fight.
So thank you. So far, I haven't been able to find another municipality through the CFO forums that are refusing to pay this amount. So if it's going through politically, I think I have to look to this table as to how it's being managed politically. From a financial perspective, not to reiterate, but Councillor Race is of the same mind as me. If we don't have a concerted force to not pay, like if we can't lobby other municipalities to not pay, then we're really standing alone. And I think there's other political mechanisms we need to go through to deal with that from a more holistic perspective. Like I said, so far I've got it out on the CFO's forum for the province, and nobody has indicated back to me right now that they're not paying both that and Green Timbers. So I'm of the same concern. I agree that the last times we challenged the province on this, we had very specific reasons to challenge it for this municipality, and consequently we did get some traction and were able to resolve some of those issues. But in this case, it is really a broader political initiative, and I think it needs to be handled through the political forums. My concern by not paying it is that we're just continuing to back up a liability when the smoke clears. So I hear the concerns around how it's going to be handled. I thought that there had been an in-camera initiative at one point that talked about some of that, but I'm not sure where it went from there because it did go back into the political UBCM realm. So I'd again have to look to this table for more
Mr. Sim
information about that.
insinuated what happened when it went to the UBCM table. The province ignored.
Yeah. And just a reminder, it is a three-way sharing right now, the way the structure is. Federal, provincial, and then the policing jurisdiction.
Anyone else? Mr. Sim?
Through the chair, I can just clarify with some numbers. So the federal government does pay 46% of the DNA costs, and the 54% then shared by the province and the users. And the amount for the 2-year average, that $19,000 amount, is based on the 2-year average of actual costs and the 2-year average usage. So it's based on what Squamish uses and with the average costing. Through my research with the UBCEM analyst, that individual wasn't able to point to any municipalities that were not paying. There was still municipalities that, from as Ms. Matthews notes, are taking a political approach about the payment of it and the additional costs, but he couldn't point to any municipalities that were not paying the invoice.
Tim?
So every other municipality is paying, and then we just get a letter now saying we want you to pay, or did everybody get the letter at the same time and they all agreed to pay? Or can we say to that website that you're talking about, Squamish is not paying, anybody else with us?
So through the chair, we certainly could put that out on the CFO forum. As same with us, most get their direction from their councils, not from other CFOs, so that's what we'd be, I think they'd be in the same spot. I think, again, it's really a political movement that needs to occur here. In terms of, sorry, I forget the first question.
Me too.
We're both operating on all cylinders this morning.
Letters sent out at the
No, I
same
was just
time.
curious,
Oh,
I mean, do
yes.
other municipalities, you know,
Thank you.
when did they get their letter?
Right, so
When
we
did
did get a letter last year when the first payment was due.
Yeah.
And so this is the second payment that's coming up in June. And
we
the
never
second
made
letter
the
is
first
coming.
payment,
We did not make the first payment, no.
Sue?
Thanks. So just to understand a little bit why BC is the only one in this conundrum of not, so BC didn't sign a letter with the federal government to pay the 54% and then downloaded it to the municipalities?
Through the chair, my understanding is that in 2013, the federal government advised all of the provinces and territories that they wanted a new agreement. And so then negotiations occurred. I don't know what other processes other provinces have, and I hesitate to presume, but my best presumption is that for every that the agreement is similar for every province, that the federal government will pay the 46%.
Yeah.
How each province then does that for, within their municipalities, I'm not certain on that.
So we don't really know if BC is the only province. I know BC was the only province that didn't sign the agreement with the feds. So back in 2015. Well, I'm not sure if they eventually did, and then now they're distributing that cost. So the cost sharing is really, I'm having trouble understanding what the percentages are and what the agreement, what the provincial agreement with the federal government is, and how that ended up getting transferred down the municipalities, except for just getting a bill to maybe cover that 54%.
So through the chair, I don't have the full history on all of that, on whether BC was the only province that
The only province that held back on that.
held back on this, so
On
I'd have to
signing.
do more research on that. And sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
So why, I'm unclear as to whether the agreement states that the province funds that amount, and then as a separate decision, the province decided to download those expenses, which that's what makes sense to me, and I would be interested if all the other provinces download to their municipalities and have the municipalities pay a small percentage of the 54%, what the percentage of that is. Just more of the financial model is needed until I would agree to pay that, and understanding the population, and as Councillor Race has said, understanding what the future of that looks like for our budgeting. So as far as I can glean, I think that BC held back for a really long time their percentage with the federal government, and then now maybe trying to distribute amongst municipalities based on population count.
I'd certainly have to do more research to report back to council on that.
Thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, my understanding is in 2013, the federal government said, we're paying almost all, if not most, of the DNA analysis. We want a new negotiation with the provinces. And they said, we're going to pay 46% federally, each province is going to pay 56%, correct?
Yeah, 54%.
54%. BC decided to split the difference and download half of it to municipalities. They phased it in over 3 years, so we didn't see the dramatic effect right in 2014. It's been phased in over 3 years, and now 2017 is the first year, I believe, where they're expecting us to pay the full amount. Correct?
It's next year, isn't it?
Yeah, it will be the 2017, 2018 beyond, so well, now into 27, because of the way the
Going forward,
RCMP
we're paying the full
going
amount
forward,
of
yes.
what the province, so I don't know what each province has decided to do. I suspect some have some cost sharing and some don't. But I think there's, for the time being, I think we should ask those questions that Councillor Race has brought forward. This is political. This is not a CFO issue or even a protective services issue. This is a political issue that we can decide to take a stand on or not. How long we do it, if we try to see if there's others that are trying to take the same stand. We've tried to take stands against downloading before and we fail, but at least we're trying to go with our conviction. So at this point, I think what I would recommend is that we pass a motion that we not pay the invoice currently and send a letter asking for further commitment or further information on how the province will protect municipalities in the event of extenuating circumstances. And will the province consider a longer average term?
Averaging period.
Averaging period to establish payments. That's a motion.
Motion, Luke?
Can I speak to it?
Yeah.
So how about instead of will the province look at a longer term, the province should look at a longer term?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll be more definitive in the language for sure.
Doug?
Yeah, I had my hand up just to clarify because I think previous questions maybe mixed the two up. There's the main policing agreement between the federal and provincial governments, which was settled at about the same time, but from the report I understand this to be a separate agreement. So there was some back and forth, I know, on the main agreement on a couple of issues, but I think ultimately the province did sign that. So that's in place, that's kind of separate from this discussion. So what we're talking about is an agreement that's exclusive to DNA testing.
Correct.
That's,
So we have a motion on the floor. See a show of hands. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Mr. Sim.
Thank you.
Moving on, our next item of business, number 4.2 is our good neighbor guidelines and noise bylaw update from Mr. Farina.
Morning, Council. My name is Rick Farina. I'm the Manager of Bio Enforcement and Animal Control for the district. And this morning, I'm going to lean heavily on Mr. Sim, and we're going to co-present. And so we'd just like to update you on the Good Neighbor Guideline and field any questions you might have with regards to the noise bylaw, and in particular decibel meters or decibel readers.
Great. Thanks, Rick. And so through the chair, I think as all of council know, the Good Neighbor Guidelines has been a project, an initiative, an ask from council. It's been a project led by Rick, championed in many parts by Robin prior to me becoming involved in the whole protective services arena. And it really has been, I think, an example of all of the departments at the district coming together. So a significant amount of collaboration, again led by Rick, and so whether it was public works or engineering, and then the final product you see in wordsmithing and suggestions from communications. So I think a really great example of everybody working together. There's been many iterations of what you see before you, and certainly, we'll admit it's maybe taken a little bit longer than what council had wanted and what we had wanted, because I know in my discussions with Rick he's like, I want to get this to the finish line and check it off as done. And so we're happy to have it before council to take direction from you and suggestions and so forth. My understanding, and again, I'm coming into it sort of at the final hour, so I'll take zero credit for this, but the initial discussions contemplated consolidating many of our regulatory bylaws into one bylaw, like I know Penticton has. But after discussions that may or may not have included council, but certainly with staff, the idea was, let's look at it from what works best for Squamish. And the thought at the end of the day was creating a booklet like you have here, have before you here. And so the booklet is just the current iteration of it. And the thoughts and ideas for how we communicate and distribute this is predominantly as an online tool, so through our website and various social media platforms with hyperlinks to all the specific bylaws. So if you're interested in noise or building aspects, so you need to get a permit. So like the past week where the individuals were before council seeking a variance before they started building, doing those kinds of things. And that's much more greener, or is more greener, and more economic. I don't think I got my grammar correct there, but I think you know what I mean. In that, because more better. Yeah, because we're able to then, if we change the bylaw, make a quick change online and it won't go into cost. Because I know at one point there'd been discussion, this was our health and safety, and it's currently out of date now too, this flip book kind of thing. And these cost about, and it was just a quick estimate, about $8 each. So as the minute they're out of date, there's a significant expense versus we can, print these out. And the idea is that we'll have some of these at all of our facilities for the public. We'll communicate with various stakeholders, whether it's realtors, contractors, BIA, etc., about this, and maybe just a one-page or with them, and again, distribute to them electronically so that they can see it. I think one of the great things about this is it's an opportunity for us to continue to educate people about how to live together on timely aspects. So whether it's snow clearing, so we have a pretty strong education component and communication component with that, and link people to this. Wildlife attractants. Hey, time to prune your trees, maybe power wash all the flowers off so that we don't get fruit, whatever the case might be. Parking issues, again, bringing people back to this. And it also will build on other initiatives like bylaw noticing and the adjudication process. And as I've mentioned, we see it as a real fluid and organic document that can be changed. And just allows us to highlight some of the things we've been doing. So, for example, unsightly premises. Many of you probably noticed some of the vacant lots around downtown. So what Rick and I talked about, and he's asked his team to do, is go out and look at all those vacant lots and say, okay, are there issues within the bylaw? And we've sent letters to all of the property owners saying, reminding them, kind of doing like this, like, noxious weeds, various aspects in there. And interestingly, just yesterday, we received communication back from one of the property owners from St. Louis saying, thank you, let us know whatever we need to do and we'll do it. And so I think that's great. It's kind of slightly off topic, but not really. It's about being a good neighbor. So I'll stop talking again then.
A nice looking document, very clean and concise looking. I do like under the untidy properties, the gnome being attacked with a guy, chainsaw wielding guy, kind of reminds me of a horror movie I saw recently. Ted? yes, Colin.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm hoping that now we can send a letter to the gas station, ex-gas station on Cleveland next to the Mountain Burger. It's been a messy fenced yard for 15 years. The entrance into town.
We've sent about 16 letters out already. Essentially what we looked at was where are the vacant lots, and then what is not under development or development permit or requested for development so far. So if there is just a vacant lot and there's really nothing going on and it's untidy and it's perhaps has garbage on it and sort of thing, noxious weeds, then a letter's already gone out.
The thing about that lot there is over the years, it was one of my pet little peeves when I first got on council 5 years ago. And we couldn't do anything because we didn't have anything to back it up. We didn't have a bylaw that could make them clean it up. At least that's what I was told back then. So we never did go after that gas station. So that gas station falls under 2 categories, which is the brownfield site, because they're doing a brownfield remediation, and the good neighbor. It's not being a good neighbor to the whole town. And hopefully we can go after them now. I mean, when I drive by sometimes I think, I can't believe we never did anything with that one. I just can't believe it. Anyway.
And to that end, thank you for you guys pushing through in the north yards there. That one lot by our pump station.
Right.
Getting it cleaned up, yeah. It looks a whole lot better. Sue?
Thanks. I would agree with Ted that unless you have strong bylaws to back up your good neighbor policy, it's not policy, it's recommendations. And we haven't had a brownfield property bylaw, really. We haven't had any recommendations, and my hope was originally that all the other good neighbor bylaws have a link to brownfield site remediation that requires people, especially with boarded up buildings, to take down their building. If it's not developed or has a permit under it, within 2 years, that it's required to be removed. And I think that's really important for our community. There has to be something to follow up with brownfield. Brownfields have to be remediated. It's cheaper for people to just leave their sites than remediate them unless there's policy in place to actually force them into remediation. And with FCM Green Municipal Funds, there's so many ways that property owners can access grants and cash to be able to remediate their brownfield sites that it should be done. But unless there's actually a bylaw in place that says you have 2 years, which I think is reasonable. Nanaimo does it, and all the other places that I looked at the Good Neighbor bylaws have a 2-year limit on derelict buildings. That if you leave your building for 2 years, it has to come down. If you leave your brownfield site for 2 years, it has to be remediated. So I really love the idea of hyperlinking to bylaws online, but unless there's a bylaw that actually backs up what you're saying in here, then it has no teeth. So, and I think giving recommendations like, you have 2 years to take down, like there's buildings that have sat here for years and they're dangerous to the public and they cause rat infestation and, and allow opportunity for bad public health. So, I think 2 years is a reasonable amount of time. The other thing is parking within 1.5 meters of driveway is not reasonable in the downtown, maybe in other places, but most people have their only parking or they don't have a driveway or they have a small driveway in downtown. People park right up to the driveways on the I know on Fifth Avenue everybody parks parallel because there's no parking in downtown. Well, tons of parking, but everybody uses the parking that they have available to them. As well, that wouldn't make sense. The whole back road is all full of cars. So think about the amount of bylaw enforcement we'd have to do if we actually enforced 1.5 meters in the driveway. And the only other thing is secondary, no, I have two other things, and if you want, is it okay to just go
Go
through
ahead,
them?
sure.
So, secondary suites, two-unit dwellings with duplex not having a third unit on it. I wasn't sure if because that basically means that anybody that has an apartment in their house can't build a laneway home. And I thought we had already changed that where you can have an apartment, because a lot of people have secondary suites and then build laneway houses, or have tenants in their house, and then, so I'm not sure how that equates to not having the laneway house as well. And if we want densification and people to use their lots, and we just talked about restricting land use, we better fix that in our bylaws. That's maybe a bylaw that has to come back. And the other thing is maybe having a section on tiny, the thing I get questioned the most on these days is what are our tiny home bylaws? So like, where can I park my motorhome? Where can I park my trailer? Where can I park my trailer on a person's land? And the tighter our housing situation becomes, the more I see living spaces parked in driveways in the downtown, and people living on their lots in their trailers, or renting out their trailers on their lots. So, or people saying, where can I park my trailer? Where can I build a tiny home? Can I just build a tiny home anywhere? So it might be worthy of a section in the bylaw, in the thing, just to have a small unit dwelling, and so people have the information.
Yeah, good point. Patty?
Yeah, I would concur with most of that stuff, if not all of it. I think this is a really good start. I think the first step to any kind of guidelines or rules is most people will try to adhere and be good neighbors, and this gives a nice, good basis to how people can do that. I do think, and I think everyone's sort of highlighted a few, I do think there's probably some thin bylaws that are backing this up that we need to dial in more. The derelict building one is one. So I think that the brownfield derelict building one, absolutely we need to beef that up significantly. I think the Good Neighbor bylaw isn't going to solve all of the problems, or even the Good Neighbor guidelines isn't going to solve all the issues, but it certainly begins to address them. I'm wondering if staff has gone through this and seen if the bylaws addressing these intentions are meeting these intentions. Have we done that sort of gap analysis completely? And the actual bylaws are going to come forward in
For
a
an
beefed up
amendment.
form?
So things like aligning the development procedures bylaw with the unsightly bylaw, which is what the, for example, the property that's just north of the Ocean Point, right, with the former Hudson House, that kind of thing. Those are things that we still have to do, make sure that, when there's a DP on the property, that people are still taking care of the condition of the property and what the ramification or the opportunities for enforcement might be. So we need to align those types of things still. You're right, there's a gap.
And the derelict building, brownfield.
That's the
timeline.
same idea,
Yeah.
same idea. So, and in fact, probably the same bylaws. But, we can always make our bylaws stronger. It depends. It's about how much opportunity for enforcement versus having those conversations, and the opportunity for the dialogue as your first step. We can always make them stronger, make them heavier-handed, giving us some greater leverage.
And just with regard to secondary suites, I believe we can only have one.
Right now.
Whether
you
it's
can-
in-house or off. And that may be a policy direction council wants to take. I think there's a whole bunch of zoning related issues that I think council probably wants to dig into at some point. The parking one, I agree with Councillor Chappelle with regard to the 1.5 meters from a driveway. God, I was just at my sister's house and you're lucky to get 3 inches from your
Yeah,
driveway
exactly.
because there's no parking. But I think in certain areas it may be better. I see some areas where we've got yellow pavement with no parking, and I'm like, why would we say no parking there? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I think there's a lot of painting issues in the town that aren't communicating or doing the job that we're wanting them to do. And that's a bit of an aside from this, sorry, distracted. But generally, I think this is a really good start. I really want to see where we can beef up the actual bylaw that gives it the teeth. But I think this is a really good start.
Jeff, did you want to speak to that before I go to Doug?
Certainly, so through the chair, just on the, I guess I'll make a couple of quick comments. I think the great thing about having this mostly electronically and in limited print is as we revise a bylaw to make it better aligned with council's directions and the community's desires and so forth, then we can make a quick change to this. As far as the enforcement aspect, and certainly Rick, jump in and correct as needed, but the aspect, our bylaw officers have a wide latitude of discretion on what they enforce. So it's pretty typical, 1.5 meters from a driveway kind of thing that you're not allowed to park in front of, but generally, our bylaw officers only will enforce that, especially in a residential neighborhood driven by complaint. So if I park, 0.75 meters before my driveway, bylaw officer is not going to come around and write me a ticket unless there's some kind of complaint and pull out their yardstick.
Get the rule out.
But certainly, as we move into the bylaw adjudication and bylaw noticing process and working for the downtown parking initiatives to work with the community to ensure there's parking available for people to come down and shop and visit and so forth and work, having consistent regulations for the length between, before a driveway and so forth has value, and those areas might be an area where it's less complaint-driven enforcement. At a council meeting coming up shortly, we are actually going to be presenting a bylaw enforcement policy for council to consider and deliberate and provide direction to us, which I think will be good. While there has been significant direction, through the times, having a consolidated policy will provide great clarity to the community and to our bylaw enforcement folks. So that's hopefully in May or early June we'll have that before
And we're going
council.
to talk about the noise bylaw after.
Yeah.
Great. Doug? Edson.
Thank you. So this is not a bylaw, of course. This is a communication tool, and some of the comments relating to individual bylaws, I think, are, with respect, more appropriate for a strategic planning session because they really cross several different departments and a whole variety of things. But for me, that's not the discussion this morning. We're not talking about individual bylaws. We're talking about this as a communication tool, and I think this is great. I just have the opportunity to scan it. I think what I was thinking of for this, which was sort of bring all these different things out of bylaws and put it into something that's really user-friendly. And we can, as a council, go back and look at the originating bylaws in each of the individual cases as time permits and as priorities permit, but that's not this morning's task. To me, the challenge with this is getting it into the hands of everybody, and how are we actually going to distribute it? Because ideally, I think we'd have this in every home in Squamish. People would be able to, seriously, people would be able to look at it, refer to it. It's got a lot of useful information, contact numbers, etc. in it. If somebody's confused about what their neighbor is doing, there's this quick, easy to read section. Might save a call to City Hall to sort themselves out. I've seen circumstances like that where people thought noise was this or something else was that, and it just takes a little bit of information. So for me, the challenge is getting this out to the community. And I don't know whether that means we put it in every mailbox or whether we actually hand deliver it to every house, it might be worthwhile doing something like that, just at least start it off and get people tuned up on it. Because if it just sits here, of course, then it isn't any good as a communication tool. So I think that, for me, is the focus going forward, is how do we get this into everybody's hands.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. With the bylaws and the updates, I mean, we've all talked about, you know, what's written in here, and we've all kind of acknowledged that a lot of the bylaws we have don't give any of this any teeth. So this is a nice document, and, you know, to Doug's case, I do. I mean, I would actually, if this came in my mailbox, I would take 10 minutes and read it. You know, I mean, I'm a counselor, so I think about this kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about printing 6,000 of them and mailing them out. I don't know, because I know you go to the post office to pick up your mail and you see what happens to flyers. You know, there's just like 2 garbage cans full of just. So I mean, I like pushing the website, and it's on the website. But back to the bylaws, and I'd like to make a motion that we tighten up the bylaws. We get staff to tighten up the bylaws on high-profile brownfield industrial sites in the downtown, and that they get enforcement put on them as soon as possible, so that we can go after that lot on the corner. Specifically that lot, write whatever we have to write to go after those guys and make them clean it up and make them plant a hedge all the way around on high-profile, you know, beautify our downtown high-profile entrance sites, have a real strong, and I'd like to do that now, rather than, you know, if you look at all the ones in here, well, that's good, but oh, we don't have a bylaw for that. Well, that's good too, but well, we don't have a bylaw. When are we going to get around to all these? And that's the $64,000 question. You know, I mean, I know we say let's do this, and we all go, yeah, let's do it, and then the next time we review our bylaws, we'll do it, and then the next time we review the bylaws, well, we forgot that one. Well, we'll put it on for next year. So, you know, to Councilor Reese's point about we'll do the review later, I'd like to make a motion that we tighten up a bylaw for the high-profile sites coming into town and go after it. That's a motion. I guess I need to.
Anyone seconding that?
I'm trying to understand what the motion says.
Well, we don't have a bylaw to go after the brownfield site
We have-
coming into town. We never have. We never have had anything to say, plant a hedge around this, make it look nice. And for 15 years, that site has been sitting like that. And they've got construction debris floating around in there. They're filling holes with sand. They've been pumping. They've been drilling for 15 years. So let's deal with that one. And you know what? If we send them a letter and say, make this site look nice, this is our new bylaw, specific for your property, make it look nice, they're going to put for sale development site. And it'll be developed so fast, make your head spin. So, or we can look at it for the next however many more years we want to look at it. And I'm just saying, let's deal with that
I
one.
know what you're saying, I'm trying to understand how we articulated it and
Okay.
what we have, so
Okay, thanks.
maybe Linda or
And I see Ms.
Don.
Glende's hand up there, perhaps you have something.
Thank
to
you, through the chair.
throw into the mix.
We do have a current bylaw, we've had it for some time, I don't know the date, called the unsightly premises bylaw, which I know council is familiar with. The issue here is the enforcement of it, and Robin likely can speak to more detail, having had the experience with it.
Through the chair, I think we do have a tool. It's the unsightly premises bylaw. And we can use that right now to go out and enforce on derelict properties. We also know that there's some language that could be stronger in that existing bylaw, but we do have a tool, and we do have the ability, if there's not movement, once letters have been sent out, and like Mr. Farina said, they've just sent out 16 letters in the downtown. So that's step one in the process of the bylaw, the tool that we actually have and have had since the 70s. If compliance is not achieved, we have the ability to have a hearing with the owner, and that's before council. And if 30 days later compliance is still not achieved, we have the ability to go in, clean up ourselves, and put the costs against the property taxes. So we do have the tools, those exist.
Right.
If I may, I'm going to try to craft a resolution that hopefully will strengthen it.
Okay, and in the interim, while you're doing that, Sue's up, and then Ted, and then Doug, and I think we'll.
Thanks, and in this, you know, I think that these are nice recommendations that pass on to bylaws. In the other cities that have this it's more of a good neighbor agreement. And it has bylaws, it ensures that there's bylaws in there to deal with brownfields. So, and the biggest thing in their good neighbor agreement is the bylaws for brownfield sites and remediation of brownfield sites. It's not just unsightly premises, because you can get deep chemical, you can get really bad contamination that is completely beautiful and isn't unsightly, but the land is contaminated and it's not going to be put up for sale because it's cheaper to not remediate it. So we need to have a bylaw in place that says that, you know, if you are leaving a derelict property for more than 2 years, it has to be either remediated. You can remediate it, or you can put it on the market, you can deal with it however you want, but there has to be movement in 2 years. You cannot sit on something that's contaminated or unsightly or has blocked up windows on it. And you have whatever is sensible for Squamish, you know, we pick a timeline that's reasonable for people to deal with, and then we put something in place. And it's just, you know, to have a pamphlet like this, I disagree with Councillor Race. I think it is prudent to keep, you know, you hand it out to everybody and then council of the day changes something in it and they'll say, but mine says this. But online you have the ability, I agree with Jeff, that the ability to change it online is the benefit of just keeping it online. And staff can always refer people to the bylaw online. And with having links there and contact numbers, most people have a computer in their homes. And then having a few pamphlets at the senior center and other places, at the shelter where people may not have access to online immediately. I really like that idea, but I do think guidelines is, you know, unless your bylaws are consistent with your guidelines and are beefed up so that you have some enforcement, then it's just another document that doesn't really have any teeth to it. So, and the only real, I mean, most of them are really good. I think that we've done a really good job and staff has done an excellent job at beefing up a lot of our bylaws, but where we still lack is that brownfield, having some sort, we don't even have a brownfield strategy. You know, we haven't really dug into brownfield sites, and it's a deficit for our community because you can leave brownfield sites, contaminated brownfield sites, and just throw a fence up.
Before I go to Robin, to what you just said, to Ted's comment about that particular property, I was by there late last year, and the guys were remediating. Badger was in there, and they said that they were, as far as they knew, they were finished with remediation on that site. So then we should be finding out what the next step is after that. But anyway, to Robin.
And you know, there are a number of brownfield strategies that we can implement through our enforcement bylaws. You know, and I'm sure Mr. Farina would agree, our current untidy and unsightly premises bylaw really is geared towards residential more than commercial or industrial type properties. And where we can tie it together through development is when people come in for a demolition permit, that we amend that bylaw, our building bylaw, to say, okay, there's some constraints that you know, this needs to happen, X needs to happen. Maybe it's, you know, the development within 2 years, or come in and apply for another. The other thing we can do is potentially get a deposit that we keep, so that to ensure that they're remediating their, or not remediating, but cleaning up the property, or making sure the fence that's around it when there's remediation going on is stays erect and isn't falling over, and there's not garbage blowing around. We do have contact on certain properties in the downtown on an ongoing basis with the owners. Some are worse than others, some are better than others, and you know, what's important, I think, is keeping the dialogue going with these people as well. And the other one is, we can also change in the development procedures bylaw what goes on with DPs. So a lot of these properties have DPs on them, and we can put enforcement triggers through that DP at the time that they're issued to ensure that there's a consequence if they don't follow through.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm just gonna go to Patty and then to Doug, and then back to Ted, Sue, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
So, I'm wondering if Councillor Pryor would like to move this motion, I'm open to obviously some tweaking. The council direct staff to augment the unsightly premises bylaw to specifically address empty lots in the downtown and other high-profile areas that promote an attractive downtown, discourage abandoned brownfield lots, and allow for effective enforcement, and bring back the bylaw to council for consideration.
I'll move that.
Seconded by Sue. All in favor?
Well, can I-
Oh, want to speak?
Speak to it, sure.
Okay.
Doug?
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful here, and particularly when you start talking about one particular lot. I think we're entering into a legal minefield, although I'm not the expert on it. There are jurisdictional issues about what we can and cannot ask a property owner to do. These are private property sites. Some sites are vacant, but not full of junk. They are just vacant and fenced. And if the fence doesn't happen to appeal to somebody, then that's a very subjective thing, but you're not collecting garbage necessarily. Some of these properties will take a while to remediate. The site where the CIDC and Tim Hortons is probably at least 10 years in remediation. It was also an old fuel tank area. So I don't want to get too specific about individual properties. I know it's high profile. I'm not sure we have the jurisdiction to force somebody to plant a hedge if that appeals to one person. But there are other properties, some of them even with buildings on them that are in other parts of the municipality, maybe not quite as visible or just as much of a problem really. So I think going forward with something like this, we'll have to take very measured steps and without, I guess it's easy to say it, but I mean, we'd have to have legal advice on this because I think we're starting to cross some different jurisdictional boundaries.
Ted?
In Alberta, if you've got a gas station and you shut her down, you've got a year to remediate it. A year. And that's a
Is that
bylaw.
provincial law?
That's a bylaw that they have there. Same in Saskatchewan. I had a friend that lived in Saskatchewan, and his job was remediating gas stations. 1 year. Okay, gas station shut, remediate. So, I mean, these guys have been at it for 15 years now. And as far as legal, staff will not bring back wording that is going to be illegal, I would assume. I just think that, boy, it'd be nice if we could deal with that lot, whatever way it takes. I mean, doesn't that bother you driving by that lot every day and you come in and its fences are like this and there's a pile of sand here and there's a puddle over here, and there's buckets and there's cones. 15 years. I mean, as a representative of the community, I think it's our job to deal with it. And I thought when I came in 5 years ago, it was a big thing to me, and it got to the point where I was phoning the oil company. They never phoned back. I phoned 5 or 6 times. I emailed. I tried to get a hold of their public relations people. Nothing. And then we talked about it, talked to Neil about it, and here we are again 5 years later, still nothing. Let's just deal with it, and I'd be happy whatever way we can.
Sue? And to Pat.
Thanks, and I would want to not make it specific to any one area as well, but have it be an overarching policy to deal with, and add something that is not a recommendation, but brings back some sort of good, solid brownfield policy. I'm just looking at the Nanaimo bylaw as well, and anytime anybody gets a business license, they make them sign an agreement. And the agreement goes into all sorts of business licensing things as well, like talking about liquor and establishments, making sure that that all the bars in town have a free phone available for people that can access different forms of transportation, like phoning a cab. So there's very useful things that deal with a lot of the things in our restaurants and business bylaws that are also good neighbor associated, and they get signed with business licenses that all the establishments agree to the good neighbor bylaws, including noise bylaws.
Can we go to Patty?
Yeah, we have a motion on the floor that's specific, but I don't think this is cutting the future conversation that Councillor Squill's talking about. So I just want to be clear, we can certainly take out reference, but the way I crafted the motion is to specifically address empty lots, parentheses, for example, in downtown and other high profile areas. So it's,
Another profile.
and so it's not, I don't want to make it specific to the Chevron site or this or that, although we can choose to be strategic in how we go about implementing the bylaw once we adopt it. But the intention is to deal with empty lots. And maybe it should actually be more specific to commercial areas, because I think that's really, there might be empty lots in a residential area and there's no issues, but it's commercial lots that are either brownfield that are looking pretty tattered, or derelict buildings that are in the main commercial area. So maybe we just add that more specifically, because I think that's the crux of where the conversation is. I don't want to be specific to a property either.
Sure.
So through the chair, just to talk a little bit about the brownfields and the remediation process. So I believe it's been brought up already in the discussion by one of the councillors about jurisdiction, and contaminated sites, I think often referred to as brownfields, are regulated provincially. And so one of the aspects is above ground, local governments or local governments outline, regulate, enforce those aspects. Below the ground is regulated provincially, so the BC Environment Management Act, the BC Contaminated Sites Regulation, and so Rick had a meeting with our environmental coordinator, thank you, yesterday, and has had dialogue, and certainly where we can strengthen existing or work with those other departments for them to bring forward a bylaw that strengthens the position and recognizes the direction from council, will want to do that. But it's also recognizing the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction in this case for below ground for those contaminated sites is the province. As I mentioned, the contaminated sites regulation is currently being updated, and so it may be that there's stronger language. I don't know, I haven't seen any of those aspects. I'm certainly not an expert. Those folks are, and we can, I think we've heard some pretty good direction from council today, and desire to move forward on that, and I'll certainly work with the Director of Engineering to ensure that they're aware of that, so that they can pull together those pieces.
Thanks, Jeff. Patty?
Yeah, and we're not directing staff to go outside of other jurisdictions. We're directing staff to see what we can do to be effective at creating attractive commercial areas, discourage abandoned brownfield and derelict buildings, and allow for us to have tools to be able to enforce that to some extent. We're not saying go above and beyond any other provincial jurisdiction where we don't have a say.
Ted?
Well, just, I mean, I agree with everything, but when we bring motions for UBCM, that might be a good one to bring, that the province review their brownfield site regulations in high traffic areas, because we have 2 gas stations in town going through brownfield cleanups. Both of them have been derelict for 15, 20 years. They're both still empty. And that's the one right over here. So 2 gas stations, and for 15 years they've both been sitting empty. Because if you leave them long enough, they'll clean up themselves, right?
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
It's been tweaked a little bit. I just sent sort of just based on, just send it to Terry. I wonder if Terry could just read it, because
Right?
Sure.
Thank you.
The council directs staff to augment the unsightly premises bylaw to specifically address empty lots, i.e. in the downtown and other high-profile areas that promote an attractive commercial public space, discourage abandoned brownfield lots and derelict buildings, and allow for effective enforcement, and bring back the bylaw to council for consideration.
just to be more specific to commercial public areas as opposed to downtown.
We have a mover and a second already. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. And before we clock out on this, I just wanted to give Mr. Freeman an opportunity to, if there was anything you wanted to add?
No,
Feel free
no,
or
no,
not?
I don't think so at this time.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Jeff?
Was there a desire to have a bit of discussion about the noise
yeah.
bylaw?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just when we thought we were out of here.
No, that's all good.
So,
Let's move into that.
okay. My understanding, and I could totally be offside on this, was that it was about the current effectiveness of the bylaw and whether or not, and I'll use the term, but I know there's a more appropriate term, and Rick can outline that, decibel meters, whether or not those were should be utilized. And certainly to give a bit of history on that, in 2014, the Christine Day, the then manager of bylaw and animal control, brought forward a report to council with amendments to the noise bylaw, and recommendations from Christine, and certainly Rick can speak much more to it, was that that decibel meters not be utilized, or that a certain decibel level not be incorporated into the bylaw. So that was my understanding of kind of the crux of the question by council from a previous meeting.
Good.
Yeah, I think that was the crux of it. What, we adopted this bylaw a year and a half ago. Oh, yeah, it was last term, yeah. And we did go outside of the recommendation and what other, sort of the standard that other communities had made with regard to construction noise after 8 p.m. We extended it to 9 p.m. We have been getting some feedback from, and I kind of, I thought I'd give it a try, see if 9 p.m. worked. We've been getting some feedback saying that 9 p.m. is too late, that we should do what other communities do and go back to 8 p.m. And so I'd like to open up that possibility with council. I think it was good intention, you know, we wanted to give people an opportunity to get the construction done when the weather's good and all that, but I think for that extra hour, we're compromising a little too much in our good neighbor policies, and so I'd like council to consider putting it back at 8 p.m. on the weekdays.
Put a motion forward for that?
Well, I certainly that's my intention, but I don't want to presume. We can put the motion on and debate the motion, I guess. Okay, I'll put the motion forward.
The motion, anyone second? Okay. And who would like to speak to it? Sue?
I would agree with that. I think 9 o'clock is too late, and I think our construction season is fairly long normally. We've had an unusual year this year, but in other seasons, and that we actually have quite an extended construction season. So I would totally agree with, and a lot of kids in our, and as far as getting kids to sleep at a reasonable hour and having things not interrupt them, I think that 8 o'clock is reasonable.
I would tend to agree with you, especially on school nights and
Yeah.
stuff for kids. It's important. I know we're coming into the summer, but that for the rest of the year, it's important that the kids are able to get to sleep. Doug?
Yeah, I remember when this came back because, or when this came before council before a couple of years ago. That was one issue. And the other issue, because I recall the discussion on it, was Sunday noise, construction noise on Sunday. We haven't had feedback on that, but if we're going to look at one, I would like to look at the other and as well, and think about considering that, because I was never personally happy with the extended noise times on Sunday. So I think generally, you know, when you're dealing in residential neighborhoods, you have to, it's just not like you're in the middle of a business park or downtown area. You just have to be a little bit more cognizant of the fact that people actually live in these neighborhoods. And so that can require more restrictions than you might have otherwise. So, you know, for me, there's a differentiation between a site that is not close to a residential area versus a site that is mid-residential areas or residential homes or apartments. I think we can distinguish between those. And I think we should pay attention to the hours in the residential areas. I'm less concerned about the hours outside of residential areas that don't impact them.
That would be a separate motion. Currently, that was not on the table, but.
Okay, Ted?
Yeah, 8 o'clock at night, I'm okay. I remember discussing it too, and I didn't think, on Sundays, what was it, 10 till 3 or something? I mean, it was a real short window on a Sunday. And I didn't remember seeing that, but I remember our discussion about it, and you know, being a construction guy, sometimes you really want to be able to work on a Sunday, but if we haven't had complaints about that one, why don't we just let sleeping dogs lie?
Ms. Glenda?
Based on the report in front of me from when Christine Day brought it, and Mr. Singh can confirm that the bylaw used to be Saturday, Sunday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., and it was changed to 8 a.m. to 7 p.m.
But using Sunday.
But wasn't there a regulation on a Sunday where you had to kind of take a permit out to do it and all that kind of stuff? It wasn't just do it. So it's quite restrictive, and so if you're trying to get a roof on the house, you can come into City Hall and say, listen, I have to work this Sunday. Is that okay? Here's your permit. I mean, the ironic part of it is where I live, Sunday's beautiful and quiet until the Ron Gun Club starts up. You know, or the neighbor starts, he mows his lawn every Sunday, right at barbecue time, you know. But I do think,
It should go on the good neighbor guide.
Yeah, take them out of
yeah,
there.
I might go over to the barbecue.
Don't mow during barbecue, Ted's barbecue.
But I'm just saying, I mean, it is, I think, you know, because you do have to take a permit out, and we can revisit it if you want, but in some cases, I mean, you have to drive down on a Friday and say, we're putting a roof on, we might be working on a Sunday, is that okay? Okay. It's not like just work through Sundays.
Right. Well, that's a separate
There is a
motion.
permitting
but
process.
Do you want to speak to the motion that's on the floor, Sue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Building permit.
Well, I want to speak to the Sunday
You don't have to get us.
thing. You know, as doing construction when you have a job is
Can we
impossible.
vote on the
to-
motion on the floor,
Well,
and
that's
then
what
we
I
can
was
talk about
hoping to,
different
yeah.
aspects? Is
Because
that
I
right?
think because I think the other motion for Sunday is a broader conversation, maybe.
I thought Doug wanted to add it to the motion on the table.
It's a separate motion, so let's vote on this. I don't
Yep.
think there's any dissent on the
Okay.
8 p.m.
All in favor? Motion carries. So, to continue?
Yeah, it's just too prohibitive if you have a job to get work done and build a house in the construction season. And there's emergencies that happen, and there's, you know, to try and come down on a Friday. If you notice work that needs done on Saturday and getting it done Saturday, Sunday, as far as residences, I don't mind a time restriction, like maybe the 8 till 7 is too long on a Sunday, and maybe it is 10 till 3. I'd be happy to discuss that, but I wouldn't want to restrict construction on Sunday.
So, just for clarity, Robin, is that still in effect? If they want to work on a Sunday, they need to come in and get a special permit to work on a Sunday?
Not that I'm
Yeah,
aware
I don't
of.
know.
As far as I know, it's a
Permit.
7-day-a-week
Okay.
construction week, and you just
I'm
have
never
to
speaking to it. It's
work
not
with it.
stuff,
That's the way
so-
that it used to be.
Yeah.
But it's not, that's the way, I think, is that not what you meant, Councilor Pryor?
Yeah.
That that's the way it was prior,
Right.
and now it's the 7 days.
I think he was under the impression that it was still in effect.
No.
Patty?
On the topic of Sundays, and we don't differentiate in our bylaw currently from Saturday, Sunday, or statutory holiday. They're all dealt with the same way, and they're all currently from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so I guess my question to council is, are we just talking about Sunday changing it, or are we talking about all Saturday, Sunday, stat holidays? I kind of like the idea of sort of a 10 to 3 or 10 to 4 window. You get a good 6 hours to get some busy work done. But are we talking about just Sundays? I don't think we want to make our bylaw too complicated or too irregular either, otherwise it gets too confusing. So are we talking about Saturdays, stats, Sundays?
Okay.
Well, I'm still of the mind is, if we're not getting complaints, why are we changing it? I mean, we have nobody phoning up saying, that guy next door to the house, he works every Sunday. I mean, if we were getting complaints, I'd say change it. But, you know, if you change it, then it's only, well, I guess if you change it, it's just complaint driven. So if a guy starts early on a Sunday and nobody complains, then bylaw's not going to be called out. But
I think as it adheres to our bylaws, would be fine sometimes.
you know, like most guys building aren't going to realize that all of a sudden it changed. Anyway, I'm okay with whatever.
Anyone else? Doug?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about Saturday or statutory holidays, which is when a lot of people who work during the week have an opportunity to work around their house. And because construction noise doesn't have to be caused by a contractor, it can be caused by anybody working in their home or anything of that nature. So those days are, I think for a lot of people, are the available days to do work on their homes. I was thinking about Sunday, and it's not a particularly religious thing, but just that one day a week where there is a little bit of a relaxation from the din of some of these projects. So I'll just sort of wrap this up, move that we amend the bylaw to restrict construction noise on Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Does anyone second that? Second by Ted. All in favor? Motion carried.
And with regard to the decibel level, I agree with staff, I think it's just, makes it very complicated when you start to put those ambiguous numbers in there. They don't really reflect what people are concerned about. Or they
Yeah.
should.
I agree. Okay, well, seeing no other hands up for conversation on this topic, I'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Sim. And thank you, Rick. Our next topic is the second handy dart bus for discussion. Number 43. Right?
Yeah, so this is a letter from Karen Clark, who, I don't know what her title is now, but she's involved a lot in different social programs, which used to work for PCH, I think she now does variety of different work. But anyway, it's been an issue that we've tried to address on a number of occasions, and I just thought it was worthwhile for us to ramp up the lobbying effort again, and to meet the need, the demand, the need out there that is currently, as Ms. Clark outlined, not being addressed or met at all. So it's a funding issue with BC Transit, but I think it's worth making sure that we get that conversation in early, so we're addressing it at the right time through the budget process.
Sue?
Yeah, BC Transit over the years has promised wondrous things about re-educating the public on handy dart services and offering taxi chits, but none of it has come to fruition. I really think we just need to add it into our budget and be prepared to negotiate with BC Transit. It's difficult for BC Transit because the funding model does not work in the provincial favor. It definitely works in the municipal favor with the handy dart. We pay less of our percentage, so it tends to be pushed off longer than a bus service, which we pay appropriately for, or 50% of our cost. Handy dart is more around like 30%, and staff can reiterate whatever the percentage is. But I think we really do just need this. It's been going on for years. Nothing's been done. BC Transit comes and gets the contract negotiated and then has been gone in our community since Johan left. So I really would like to add this to the budget next year. Of course, it will have to be discussed, but I would like to see a second handy dart. I think that our population growth has expanded to the point where we definitely require a second one. I know people sit in my clinic for hours waiting for the handy dart to show up.
Can we ask staff, I don't see Ms. Matthews anymore, what we have to put in our budget for an additional handy dart for next year, or a portion of that?
Okay. If somebody,
Just to clarify, so are we talking about funding the whole thing or our portion?
Our portion.
Being a budget option?
You cannot enter the contract without doing,
I think,
a portion. It has to be, the contract, BC Transit's contract states that you cannot fund transit in its entirety. You have to have the agreement of the province and their share.
Mr. Wickham, I saw your hand up.
It was, thank you. I wanted to touch on a couple of points. Certainly, as you pointed out, for this year, we're through the budget process, so we're really talking about if we want to add on a second bus, then it would be for next year. The last formal review that BC Transit did was in 2012, so it's certainly time for an update of that. And I believe we have time in our budget cycle to do a formal request for review and then have the results back in time to make decisions for the fall. I did do some digging. It's been a bit of a scramble. I only saw the letter that came in on Monday morning, so I've been spent a fair amount of time talking to folks at our operating company, BW Transit, and specifically talked to their dispatch person who does all of the matching people and times and scheduling and everything. We had a pretty good conversation this morning about it. So the letter that we're discussing outlined a specific class at Brennan Park, which not all seniors are able to get to who would like to go there. It also discussed school times as another peak time for disabled students. PW Transit is currently accommodating a single student who's going to Howe Sound Secondary, and that's the only request they've had. So they don't feel that they're turning anybody away around school times. But certainly this class, which I believe is Mondays and Wednesdays, they are able to take everybody down from Hilltop, but in doing so they fill up the bus and they can't get anybody from anywhere else in the community, so they're turning people away. So that's a definite peak time when there's a constraint. As far as other times and getting to appointments, so we had asked back at the end of last year, we asked them how many turnbacks they have, and they said they keep stats on how many trips, but not how many non-trips. So we asked them to start taking that data, and I think in my discussions this morning, I'm finding that even that's a difficult question to ask because they always try to accommodate. They're almost always able to accommodate. As Councillor Chappelle pointed out, though, it's not always at the exact time. Sometimes we can definitely get you to your doctor's appointment, but we have to come an hour early in order to schedule everybody in. They do have a small budget from the district, $150 per month for taxi chits. And they often don't need to use that whole budget. But people are not necessarily getting places where they want to be at the times they want to get there. And so that's possibly something we can work with BC Transit on as more of a public outreach to people to feel if they're seeing the service is the way they want it to be. And I think that's definitely worthwhile. I think in the short term though, we kicked around an idea that I believe is going to work. I don't want to make any promises here because it's only in the last hour that it sort of came together. But there is a spare bus. BC Transit's policy is that they always have a full spare bus. And even if we brought in another bus, we would now have 3 and 1 would be spare. In talking to the operating company, they felt that they could do all of their preventative maintenance around this one peak time class on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then there would only be the risk of breakdown. So for a relatively modest uplift in the costs that we could probably absorb in the rather significant transit budget that we have, we should be able to get a bus driver on Mondays and Wednesdays for 4 hours to use the second bus. They estimate they've got a 90-95% uptime on that second bus, so there will be maybe some weeks where people can't get to class, but that should be a rare day. So as long as everybody in the community understands that sometimes the second bus won't be able to run, we should be able to get more people to that class more often.
Sue?
So I appreciate all that. I think that's a really great idea to deal with it this year. In 2012, we were at capacity with our handy dart. And they said that the problem was that the people that needed to use it, because that's, the problem has been, is that the people that could be using it are not using it because the reputation of going an hour early or sitting around and waiting at appointments for an hour afterwards is too prohibitive for people with disabilities. There's also our standard buses also take wheelchairs and can accommodate wheelchair travel. And that education piece in 2012, the biggest thing that they promised was rolling out this massive education with pamphlets and BC Transit coming into our community and going into the senior center and Hilltop House and doing education on how to apply for the Handy Dart, how to use the service, when to use taxi chits. We haven't had it, we haven't seen any of that, and it's every year they come back and we ask for an extra Handy Dart. They talk about this amazing communication strategy that they're going to implement, and it hasn't been done yet. So, and I feel like as a municipality that we haven't followed up on it to make sure that that happens for our community. So it may be that there are, you know, to do those measurements without that education piece in place is going to be very difficult. So, and with the growth to almost 20,000 people, I think it would be prudent to have a second Handy Dart. And there's things like supplementing the school transit system. You know, there's what I heard in 2012 was that there was kids that also couldn't get to school that were using Handy Dart services to get to school in the morning. So I don't know how many, is that a big problem anymore? I'm not sure. We have no information, and you know, really working at a deficit of information and statistics is yes, that's, yeah, I'm going to move that. That council direct staff to explore with BC Transit provider and BC Transit augmenting the Handy Dart service and taxi service program within our existing budget in 2017, and that staff communicate with BC Transit the expectation that an additional Handy Dart be considered in the 2018 budget. Thanks, doing a lot of writing motion.
Seconded by, Patty? Anybody want to speak to that?
I think I was.
No, I appreciate and thank Chris for having that conversation and bringing back that sort of interim solution. See if we can augment it in the meantime, and then get some real numbers and some real basis to a funding decision in 2018. But really communicate with BC Transit that we want this seriously considered as part of the service in 2018.
We have a motion on the floor. Call the question. All those in favor? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Very well done. Thank you. Moving on, we have number 5, council status of recommendations to council. Any?
I think there were
Don't
any
think
on
so.
the agenda.
Anyone? No? Referrals from council? No? Seeing none. Roundtable discussion, anyone?
I just wanted to bring up one thing that was on a thread on Facebook that was, a lot of people are taking pictures of the parking at the top of Perth. And the Perth residences are wondering why we've restricted parking in the Smoke Bluffs but haven't restricted parking for residences up at the top of Perth. And I think this just hails into a discussion of trailheads and how we're going to accommodate the growing number of people that are using our recreation facilities and really that we don't have any facilities for. So I'd like council to consider what we're going to do about 60 cars parked at the top of Perth. And it wasn't so much, they didn't mind the parking, but they did mind dogs being off leash and running onto people's lawns. People were picnicking on people's lawns. It's not just, so maybe that's something in the Good Neighbor bylaw that gets dealt with. I'm not sure how that gets dealt with,
That's
but
a good suggestion.
we have to,
for the good neighbor.
yeah, exactly. But we have to consider the residences that live up there, and even though, you know, you can argue that they bought into an area that had trailhead parking in there, we have restricted parking in the Smoke Bluffs for the exact same reason, for the enjoyment of the residences, that climbers don't park in that neighborhood. But we maybe have parking at the Adventure Center and people can ride their bikes up there. Imagine riding your bikes to a trailhead. It seems to make sense.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's obviously, as mountain biking gets more popular, not only from locals but from visitors, it's a significant issue. And it deserves a long conversation, we don't
Yeah.
have it right now, but
For the next agenda.
maybe we'll work with Linda to maybe put on the next agenda, and it would be interesting to see if we can allocate, just like we did with the Smoke Bluffs Park, you know, a specific parking area within general proximity to specific trail network areas, to help alleviate some of this industry. And I do agree, I think it's a great suggestion that we put it in the good neighbor bylaw, that trailheads and how you behave at trailheads in neighborhoods is part of a good neighbor bylaw. I think that's good suggestion. So we'll work at maybe getting this on an agenda, either a committee of the whole or committee meeting, hopefully relatively soon. And maybe in the meantime, staff could look at possible areas that may be useful trailhead biking parking areas.
Mr. Wickham?
Just two brief thoughts. We have had a recent complaint from a resident in the area, and the quick response we could do is we put a "you're in a residential area" sign up, which hopefully helps a little bit in people getting the right mindset, but it is just another sign. So certainly a longer term solution makes sense, and people have mooted the idea of working with the school district to use the elementary school parking in the during weekends. I'm not sure where that conversation is at, or how practical that will be in the long term. But I think the idea, just like in our schools, Safe to Schools program, we have a drive to 5 idea, that within 5 minutes walk of the school. Have the same idea that if we can find an area within a 5-minute bike ride of the trailhead.
To a bike ride?
I think that's pretty reasonable that people ride their bike to the bike ride. Certainly the fact that it's up a steep hill, I think puts some people off riding all the way from their doors. And certainly people coming from outside the district, that's an issue. But there's no specific land right at that spot for us to put something like the Smoke Bluffs parking lot. We need to be a little more creative.
So,
Thanks, and that's, you just answered my question, is that, you know, that was a complaint that I got from residences, is that they put up a sign that just says "be nice," but it doesn't actually change it doesn't change anybody's behavior, and they wondered why the discrepancy of the Smoke Bluffs parking. And I get that there is an option of parking down below for the Smoke Bluffs, and I think working with the school board is an excellent idea. But really, if you're going to be riding on steep mountain bike trails, doing an extra 10 minutes to get up the hill, we're going to get to that point. There's just too many people entering residential neighborhoods and parking everywhere or we go to permit parking, or and have some streets be residents only and some streets be free for all. I think that there's a lot of different discussion points that we can have that could be brought to the public, and maybe some problem solving. And once we have Chima lands developed, maybe that can be something that we include, trailhead parking.
Interestingly, I've never looked at this. There is a large municipal lot right beside the Perth dead end road. And I don't know if it's flat or easily, but it's a huge lot, municipal lot, right there. And in terms of future planning, in terms of trail infrastructure, we don't necessarily at this point, I mean, there's other issues around Chima lands, but we don't necessarily even need to wait for that. There's a large, like, multiple acre lot, and more than one. There's 4 of them.
That's all really steep.
how much blasting do we need?
Well, no, and I don't know what, if there's, but it's a large area. So anyway, it's worth looking into. Not all of it, there might be steep areas that just are inaccessible, but maybe there's might not be able to get that done this year, and maybe the school is but in the future, we should be looking at these parking nodes, and seeing what land is available.
Good idea. Chris?
Through the chair, we did have a brief look at those lots, and by brief I mean the sort of 3 engineers around a computer screen for 10 minutes to look. There's some environmental issues, but mostly there's a steepness issue. So it's easy to look at the flat looking map, but there may be some room there for some areas, as you pointed out. to at least get some cars off the road for sure.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think Gary's gonna bring them up, I think,
Apparently I can't even find the map, so I'm not having much luck here, so I better
fighting with me on my scanner.
Yeah.
That's interesting to see that.
Like, yeah, or Pia. Even the bottom of Pia is flat. I don't know who owns all that land, the flat trail at the top of, yeah,
We'll briefly use them.
Anyway, I think
yeah, it's something worth looking at for
it should be part of the,
robust discussion.
okay.
Alrighty,
Thank you.
I think that covers it.
We'll get it on.
Looking for a motion to terminate. Moved by Patty, seconded by Sue. All in favor? Carries. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.